Vampire King found single mom leaving letters on his son's grave. What they contained shook his soul. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. In the small, quiet town of Crescent Falls, a woman by the name of Amelia Carter had made a ritual of visiting the cemetery every week. It wasn't just any cemetery. This was where her son, Nathaniel, had been laid to rest. He had died young, far too young, but it wasn't the grief that brought her back every week. It was the letters. Amelia had started writing letters to Nathaniel the day he passed, each one filled with words of love, regret, and hope. She didn't know why she felt the need to do it, but something told her she wasn't just writing to a grave. Every letter she left felt like a conversation. She could almost hear his voice in the wind as she read them aloud to herself. It was her only way of staying connected to him. It was also her only way of dealing with the weight of guilt she carried every single day. Nathaniel's death hadn't been an accident. It wasn't just fate or misfortune. It was a result of choices she made in the past. Choices that involved a dangerous man, a man she wished she had never known. She had never told Nathaniel the truth about his father, never wanted him to know the full extent of the danger that man had brought into their lives. But the pain of not being able to protect him ate away at her. That was why, on this particular day, she was at the grave yet again, standing in front of her son's resting place, clutching the latest letter she had written. She had just finished reading it aloud when a rustling sound caught her attention. She wasn't alone. Amelia quickly wiped her eyes, standing up and turning toward the sound. Standing there, in the distance, was a figure, a tall man, dressed in dark clothes, watching her from a distance. His presence was commanding, but there was something almost unnatural about the way he stood. She had never seen him before, yet there was something oddly familiar about him. As he stepped closer, the world around her seemed to quiet. Every step he took was deliberate, as if each movement had purpose. His eyes were cold, piercing, and a deep, unnatural shade of amber. Amelia felt a chill run down her spine. Who was this man? And why did it feel like he was looking into her soul? I'm sure you noticed it too. The man standing in front of Amelia, his piercing amber eyes never leaving hers. Her breath caught in her throat as she took a step back, instinctively clutching the letter to her chest, as if it was the only thing that could protect her from this stranger. She had never seen him before, but somehow, he felt like he knew her. And worse, he seemed to know her son's story, Nathaniel's story. The man's movements were deliberate, calculated, his every step bringing him closer to Amelia. There was something undeniably commanding about him, something unnatural. His presence felt like a shadow, one that extended into the very air around them. Amelia, despite her fear, couldn't help but feel drawn to him. It wasn't just his appearance, tall, dark, with eyes that glowed eerily in the dim light of the cemetery. It was the feeling that seemed to emanate from him, a feeling that made her believe he wasn't just a man, but something more. You're the one who's been leaving the letters. The man's voice was low, almost too calm, as he finally spoke. His tone was sharp, yet it held an almost sorrowful edge to it. Amelia froze, her heart racing. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. How could he know about the letters? No one else knew. No one else had ever seen her secret moments of grief. She had always kept them hidden from the world. You've been speaking to him, he continued, his eyes flickering toward the grave. To my son. Amelia's pulse quickened. Your son? She whispered, her voice shaky. The man's gaze never wavered. Yes, Nathaniel. He's been dead for many years now, but his soul has not yet left. Your letters, they've kept him here. Amelia's blood ran cold. There was no way. She didn't know this man. She didn't even know who he was. How could he possibly know about her son? Her thoughts spun, struggling to process the reality of what he was saying. What do you mean? His soul has not left, she finally managed to ask, her voice barely more than a breath. The man stepped closer, his dark presence seeming to fill the space between them. I am the Vampire King, he said quietly. And Nathaniel was not just any child. He was meant for something much greater, something beyond what you could understand. Amelia felt a chill sweep over her. The words he spoke were heavy, laced with a strange authority. She couldn't explain it, but she believed him. There was no rational explanation for the unease settling in her stomach, for the overwhelming sense of power that surrounded him. She had always been told stories of supernatural beings, of creatures that lived in the shadows, but she never believed them. Now, standing before this man, those stories suddenly didn't seem so far-fetched. "But my son is dead," Amelia whispered, tears threatening to spill over. "What do you want with me?" The Vampire King studied her for a long moment before speaking again, his voice gentler now, but still carrying the weight of something ancient and unyielding. "I want to know why you're still here, why you've been calling to him." Amelia's hands shook as she clenched the letter tighter, her mind reeling. Why? Why had she been writing the letters? She didn't know. It felt as though someone, was guiding her, urging her to reach out. But she hadn't known this man, hadn't known the depth of the truth he was speaking. She looked down at the grave, the stone still cold beneath her feet, and for a moment, it felt like Nathaniel was watching her, his spirit lingering nearby. She took a shaky breath before speaking again. I wrote the letters because I couldn't let go. I couldn't say goodbye. He was my son, and I failed him." The Vampire King's expression softened for a moment, his gaze shifting to the grave. "You did not fail him. Your love for him, it brought him peace. It's why he's still here." Amelia's heart pounded in her chest as the weight of his words sank in. She had always blamed herself for Nathaniel's death, for not protecting him from the man who had brought danger into their lives. But now, in front of this mysterious stranger, something inside her shifted. "But why now?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Why do you come to me now?" The Vampire King's eyes glowed with a strange intensity. "Because, Amelia Carter, your son is not the only one trapped between life and death, and you are the key to his release." I cannot imagine the chaos that must have been running through Amelia's mind. The Vampire King's words hung in the air, and for a moment, it felt like time itself had frozen. Her heart beat loudly in her chest as the weight of his revelation sank in. She had always blamed herself for Nathaniel's death, never once imagining that there could be something more, something beyond the mortal realm. Yet here he was, standing before her, telling her that her son's soul was trapped, not because of her failure, but because of something she could not yet understand. "What do you mean?" Amelia's voice trembled as she finally broke the silence, her hands shaking as she held tightly to the letter. The Vampire King stood tall, his presence commanding, his amber eyes never leaving hers. "Your son, Nathaniel, was bound to a fate beyond the ordinary," he explained, his voice low and steady. "There are forces in this world, forces you cannot see, but I can. And Nathaniel, he was caught in between. He was meant to become more than he was, more than a child. But because of his connection to me, because of what happened before he died, his soul has been trapped." Amelia's eyes widened in disbelief. "What are you talking about? How could this happen? My son was just a boy. What does this have to do with you?" The Vampire King's gaze softened for the first time, though his expression remained serious. "He was more than just a boy. He was my son, in a way you couldn't have known. My blood runs through his veins. And because of that, his death was not natural. His soul became tethered to mine." Amelia felt a chill run down her spine as she took a step back, her heart pounding. Are you saying Nathaniel was yours?" she whispered, barely able to comprehend what he was implying. The Vampire King nodded slowly. "Not in the way you think. He was never meant to be born, not like any other child. His mother, your mother, she had a bond with me, a bond that tied our fates together long before Nathaniel's birth. That bond carried through to him." Amelia felt her head spin. She had never been told any of this, and now it was becoming too much to bear. She had raised her son alone, never once knowing the truth behind his father's identity. She had fought to protect him from the dark secrets of her past, and yet, here it was, all spilling out before her. "Why didn't you tell me?" Amelia's voice cracked with pain. "Why didn't you warn me?" The Vampire King lowered his gaze, his face hardening. "I couldn't, for many reasons. But now, Amelia, you need to understand that Nathaniel's soul is still here, not by accident, but by design. He was meant for something far greater, something I could never fully explain to you. And it is your love for him that has kept him here." Amelia felt a pang in her chest as she realized what he was saying. Her grief, her pain, the endless letters she had written, each one a call to her son's spirit, had somehow kept him tethered to this world. "So what do you want from me?" she whispered. "What do I have to do?" The Vampire King stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "You must help him move on. You've kept him here long enough, but it's not enough to simply write letters. You must release him, and in doing so, you will free yourself from the past that holds you both captive." Amelia's mind raced. How could she let go of her son? How could she release him when she had never gotten the chance to say goodbye? She had spent years in pain, never able to move on, clinging to the hope that one day, somehow, she could undo the damage. "How can I do that?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The Vampire King's amber eyes gleamed with a mixture of sadness and something darker. "There is a ritual, one that will sever the bond between you and your son. But it will come at a cost, Amelia. You will have to face your own deepest fears and your own regrets. And once it is done, there will be no turning back." Amelia swallowed hard. The idea of facing her darkest memories, her worst regrets, was terrifying. But she knew, deep down, that she couldn't continue living in the shadow of her son's death. She had to let him go. She had to free them both. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "I'll do whatever it takes." The Vampire King gave a slow nod, his expression unreadable. "Very well. But be warned, Amelia. The cost may be more than you think." "I've never seen her like this." Amelia stood in the dim light of the cemetery, the weight of the Vampire King's words still hanging heavily in the air. She had agreed to help her son's spirit move on, but as the minutes passed, the reality of the situation started to set in. There was no turning back now. The ritual, the severing of the bond, would bring closure, but at a cost. A cost she wasn't sure she was ready to pay. The Vampire King's eyes gleamed with a strange intensity as he regarded her, standing perfectly still in the shadows. He had warned her that the ritual would require more than just a moment of courage. It would force her to face everything she had been running from for years. Her grief, her guilt, the choices she had made, they all had to come to light. And when that happened, she would be forced to let go of what she held dearest. Amelia's hands shook as she held onto the letter to her son. This letter was like all the others, filled with love and sorrow, but it was also a part of the past that she could no longer cling to. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but it was no use. Her heart was racing, and her mind was full of doubt. "Are you ready?" The Vampire King's voice was calm, but there was a note of something darker beneath the surface, something that made Amelia feel as though time itself was running out. She nodded slowly, her throat tight. "I have to do this. I have to let him go." The Vampire King took a step toward her, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the cemetery. "Good," he said, his voice almost approving. "Then we begin." He motioned for her to follow him, and without hesitation, Amelia did. They walked. In silence, the sound of their footsteps echoing through the graveyard as they moved deeper into the heart of the cemetery, toward an ancient, crumbling stone structure she had never noticed before. The Vampire King led her to the stone door, which opened with a creak when he pressed his hand against it. It was as though the stone itself recognized him. The chamber inside was dark, but as they entered, the walls seemed to glow with a faint, eerie light. There were markings carved into the stone, ancient symbols that Amelia didn't recognize. At the center of the room was an altar, old and weathered, surrounded by candles that flickered in the dim light. "This is where it must be done," the Vampire King said softly, his eyes narrowing as he stepped closer to the altar. Amelia's stomach churned. She didn't know what to expect, but she knew it wouldn't be easy. "What do I need to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Vampire King's gaze softened, but there was still an unsettling intensity in his expression. "You will need to open yourself to the truth, Amelia. You will need to remember everything. Every regret, every choice, every moment of guilt. You will have to face them all, and in doing so, you will set Nathaniel's soul free." Amelia's heart pounded in her chest. The thought of reliving her past, of facing all the painful memories, was unbearable. But she knew that if she didn't do this, she would never be able to move forward. She stepped toward the altar, her feet heavy with the weight of her decision. "How do I begin?" she asked, her voice trembling. The vampire king stepped behind her, placing a hand on her shoulder. Close your eyes, he instructed gently. Let the memories come. Let them flood you. And when they do not resist them. Amelia closed her eyes, trying to steady her breath as she did. At first, there was nothing but silence. But then, as the minutes ticked by, the memories started to seep in. The days when Nathaniel had been a child, running around the house with his laughter filling the air. The way he looked up at her with such trust, such innocence. But then, as the memories deepened, so did the pain. The day she lost him, the day he died because of her choices, the mistakes she made, the man who had come into their lives, bringing nothing but darkness. She felt the weight of it all, every moment of regret, every failure. And as the memories crashed over her, she felt a sharp pain in her chest. It was as though her heart was being ripped apart, the guilt and sorrow overwhelming her. Tears began to stream down her face, but she did not wipe them away. Instead, she let them fall, letting her emotions flow freely. The vampire king stood behind her, silent and still, watching as she faced the storm within her. Amelia's breath became ragged as the memories continued to flood her mind, each one more painful than the last. She could see Nathaniel's face, hear his voice, feel his touch. She wanted to scream, to beg for him to come back. But she knew that was impossible. Slowly, the room began to change. The air grew thicker, the light brighter. Amelia opened her eyes, and she could feel the presence of her son, his spirit close. But it was no longer filled with sorrow. There was peace in the air now, a sense of release. The ritual was working. Amelia's heart, though still heavy, began to lighten. She could feel the bond between her and Nathaniel breaking, the weight of her past slowly lifting. And as she looked up, she saw the vampire king watching her, his expression unreadable. "It is done," he said softly, his voice almost reverent. "You have freed him." Amelia stood there, her legs weak beneath her, but a sense of relief washed over her. Nathaniel was free, and so was she. Amelia stood there, her body trembling as the weight of the ritual finally began to settle. She felt as though she had been washed clean, freed from a lifetime of guilt and sorrow. Nathaniel's spirit was no longer bound to this world, no longer tethered to the pain that had kept him here. For the first time in years, Amelia felt a sense of peace, deep, profound peace. But as the last traces of the ritual faded, she felt a strange emptiness in its wake. She looked around, half expecting to see Nathaniel's spirit lingering in the air, but all that remained was the quiet stillness of the chamber. The vampire king stood behind her, his presence as commanding as ever, but there was something different about him now. His expression was unreadable, though there was a hint of something like respect in his eyes. "You did well," he said, his voice softer than before. "You have freed your son." Amelia nodded, her throat tight. She wanted to speak, to thank him for guiding her through this, but the words caught in her chest. Instead, she simply stood there, unsure of what to do next. The silence between them stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like the calm after a storm, when everything that had once been turbulent finally settled into stillness. After a long moment, the vampire king spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "You are no longer bound to the past, Amelia. But that doesn't mean you are free from the consequences of what happened. There is still much you must face." Amelia looked up at him, confusion in her eyes. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice shaky. The vampire king's amber eyes darkened, and for a moment, the room seemed to grow colder. "You have released Nathaniel's spirit, but there are still things in your past that you cannot avoid. The man who brought so much darkness into your life, the one who led to your son's death, he is still out there." Amelia's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He's gone. He died years ago. I buried him along with my son." The vampire king shook his head slowly. "No, Amelia. He didn't die. And now he's returned. The consequences of his actions are far from over. He has returned for you." Amelia's breath caught in her throat. The man, the one she had thought was gone forever, was still alive? She had spent years trying to forget him, to move on from the man who had taken so much from her. But now, the past was crashing back into her life in a way she could not deny. "How do you know this?" she asked, her voice trembling. The vampire king met her gaze, his expression filled with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. I know because I have seen his return, and I can feel his presence, just as I felt your son's spirit. The darkness he left behind has not faded, and now he is coming for you again." Amelia's mind raced. She had thought she was done with him, that her past was behind her. But now, she realized how wrong she had been. The man who had caused so much pain, so much loss, was still out there, and he was coming for her. "What do I do?" she whispered, her heart pounding in her chest. The Vampire King's eyes softened, but there was no mistaking the seriousness in his voice. "You face him. You do not run away this time. You have the power to change your fate, Amelia, but only if you are brave enough to confront him." Amelia closed her eyes, her mind reeling. She had never wanted to face that man again. She had done everything she could to avoid him, to forget the darkness he had brought into her life. But now, it seemed she had no choice. If she wanted to be truly free, she had to confront him. She had to take back control of her life. When she opened her eyes again, she met the Vampire King's gaze with a new resolve. "I will face him," she said, her voice steady. "I won't run anymore." The Vampire King nodded, a flicker of approval crossing his features. "Good. You are stronger than you realize, Amelia. But remember, you are not alone in this. I will help you. I will help you destroy the darkness he left behind." With that, the Vampire King turned and began to walk toward the door of the chamber, his footsteps echoing through the silence. Amelia hesitated for a moment, then followed him. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, she felt a spark of hope. She was ready to face whatever came next. No more hiding. No more running. The past had come back to haunt her, but now, she was going to make sure it would never control her again. "I can feel it, the coldness that permeates the air around us as we move closer to the unknown." Amelia walked beside the Vampire King, her steps heavy with the weight of what was to come. The thought of facing the man who had once held so much power over her life sent a cold shiver down her spine. But there was no turning back now. She had promised herself that she would not run, no matter what happened next. The Vampire King's presence beside her was both reassuring and unnerving. His power, palpable and almost tangible, seemed to fill the space around them, urging her forward. Yet, there was something else in his eyes, a hint of something personal, something beyond his usual coldness. "Are you ready?" His voice was low, but there was an edge to it that made Amelia's stomach tighten. She nodded, though her heart raced faster with each step they took. The path ahead seemed to stretch endlessly into the unknown. They walked in silence, the atmosphere heavy with the anticipation of what was to come. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the Vampire King spoke again, breaking the silence. "He's close now," he said quietly, his eyes scanning the darkness around them. "We must proceed carefully." Amelia's breath caught in her throat. The man, the one she had feared for so long, was just ahead, waiting. "I don't know if I can do this," she confessed, her voice shaking. She had promised herself she would confront him, but the closer they got, the more the fear crept in. "You can," the Vampire King replied firmly, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "You are stronger than you think, Amelia. You've already proven that by freeing your son. Now, it's time to finish what you started." Amelia swallowed hard, trying to push down the knot in her throat. She had freed Nathaniel's soul, but now she had to face the man who had caused all of this. The man whose actions had led to her son's death. The man who had once held her captive in the grip of fear. "I'm not afraid of him," she whispered to herself, though the words barely sounded convincing even to her own ears. "I'm afraid of what I might have to do." The Vampire King's eyes softened, and for a moment, he almost seemed human. "You won't have to do anything you're not ready for," he assured her. "But you must be prepared. There will be no second chances." Amelia nodded, trying to steady her breath. The weight of the moment was almost suffocating. She had spent years running from her past, from the darkness that man had brought into her life. But now, it was time to face him. Time to reclaim the pieces of herself that she had lost. The Vampire King stopped suddenly, his sharp gaze locking onto something in the distance. Amelia's heart skipped a beat. There, emerging from the shadows, was the figure she had dreaded seeing again. The man she had once loved, the one who had destroyed her world. His eyes gleamed in the dim light, an unsettling mixture of arrogance and malice. His presence seemed to suck the warmth from the air around them. "It's him," Amelia whispered, her voice barely audible. The Vampire King nodded, stepping forward slightly, his posture stiff and controlled. Stay close to me, he warned, his voice low and commanding. Amelia's instincts screamed at her to run, to turn away from the man who had once held so much power over her. But she didn't. She stood her ground, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. It's time, the Vampire King said. The man before them stepped into the light fully now, his eyes locking with Amelia's. You thought you could escape me, didn't you? His voice was smooth, with an edge of mockery that sent a chill down her spine. You were never meant to get away, Amelia. Amelia's heart raced as the memories flooded back. The lies, the betrayal, the years she had spent trying to outrun this moment. But now, here he was, standing in front of her once again. The man who had ruined her life. The man who had taken her son from her. She clenched her jaw, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. I'm not running anymore, she said firmly. The man's smile was cold, calculating. We'll see about that, he sneered. The tension in the air was thick, palpable. The Vampire King stepped forward, his eyes never leaving the man. You've caused enough pain, enough destruction. It ends tonight. The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. The man sneered, his eyes glinting with amusement. Do you really think you can defeat me? He challenged. The Vampire King's gaze darkened, his voice colder than ever. I don't need to defeat you, he said, his words slow and deliberate. I just need to make sure you never hurt anyone again. The air seemed to crackle with the power that emanated from the Vampire King, his every word like a warning. The man's smug expression faltered for a moment, but it quickly returned. We'll see who has the last laugh, he hissed, taking a step forward. Amelia's heart hammered in her chest, but she didn't flinch. This was it. The moment she had been dreading for so long was finally here. She had no choice now but to face him. Face the man who had taken so much from her, and finally put an end to the nightmare that had haunted her for so long. The man before Amelia stood motionless, his eyes locked with hers, a cold smirk curling at the corner of his lips. The air between them felt thick, as though the entire world had paused, waiting for the inevitable clash. Amelia's pulse pounded in her ears, but she refused to look away. This was the moment she had feared for so long, the moment when her past would come crashing into her future. The Vampire King, standing just beside her, was a silent force. His presence was a constant reminder that she was not alone in this, that for once, she had the power to fight back. The man in front of them sneered. You think you can stop me? He asked, his voice dripping with disdain. You think you've escaped the life I gave you? The darkness I introduced into your world? Amelia felt a wave of rage course through her. This man had taken everything from her, used her, manipulated her, and then vanished as if nothing had happened. But here he was, standing before her, still as dangerous as ever. You don't own me anymore, she said, her voice shaking but firm. The man's eyes flickered with something that could have been amusement. Really, he sneered. You think a few years of running will erase everything I did to you? You think the fear I planted in your heart is gone? It never leaves, Amelia. It's always there, waiting for you to break. Amelia clenched her fists, her body tense. The memories flooded her mind. The fear, the betrayal, the helplessness she had felt in his presence. But no more. I'm not afraid of you, she said, her voice louder now, gaining strength with each word. The Vampire King stepped forward, his presence darkening the air around them. Enough of this, he said in a low, commanding voice. You've had your time, but it's over now. The man before them flinched, just for a moment, but it was enough to show that the Vampire King's words had struck a nerve. Amelia watched as the air around them seemed to crackle with tension. The Vampire King turned toward her, his amber eyes softening slightly. Stay close to me, he instructed. You're stronger than you think, but you must be careful. He still has power. Amelia nodded, feeling a sense of reassurance in the Vampire King's words, but her resolve was clear. She was not running anymore. The man before them stepped closer, his hands curled into fists at his sides. You think you can stop me, Vampire King? He spat, his voice laced with venom. You're nothing but a shadow of the past. You can't stop what's already been set in motion. The Vampire King's expression remained unreadable, but Amelia could feel the power radiating from him. I'm not here to stop you, he said quietly. I'm here to make sure you never hurt anyone again. The man's laugh was hollow, devoid of any real humor. You're delusional if you think you have that power. I've seen what you've done, Vampire King. You're no different from me. I'm not the one who has to hide in the shadows, the Vampire King retorted, his voice low and full of disdain. And I'm not the one who hides behind fear and manipulation. The man's face twisted with anger, but Amelia noticed something else in his eyes, fear. The realization hit her like a lightning bolt. The man was afraid. Despite his power, despite the control he had over her life for so long, he feared what was coming. And that fear was the key to defeating him. Amelia stepped forward, her heart pounding, but this time it was not from fear. You don't control me anymore, she said, her voice steady, stronger than she had ever felt before. You never did. You just made me believe you did. The man's eyes widened in disbelief, his face contorting with rage. You think I didn't see what you were doing? He hissed. You think I didn't see the way you slipped away from me, how you thought you could escape the truth? Amelia's eyes locked with his. The only truth that matters now is that you no longer have any hold over me, she said. With those words, the air around them seemed to shift. The Vampire King stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Amelia. Together, they were a force, an unstoppable wave of power and resolve. The man before them had once been the embodiment of darkness, the source of so much pain and fear in Amelia's life. But now he was nothing. He was just a man, standing alone in the face of something much greater than himself. Amelia knew that this was the end, the final confrontation, the moment when the past would finally be buried, never to haunt her again. The man's face twisted with desperation, but it was too late. The Vampire King raised his hand, and the air crackled with power. The ground beneath them seemed to tremble, as though the very earth recognized what was about to happen. You are done, the Vampire King said, his voice calm, but filled with an undeniable finality. Amelia stood beside him, feeling the weight of the moment. The man before them staggered back, his face a mask of disbelief and terror. This is not how it ends, he screamed, but his words were drowned out by the overwhelming power that surrounded them. Amelia felt the fear that had haunted her for so long begin to dissolve, like mist in the morning sun. For the first time in years, she was truly free. The Vampire King's power surged forward, enveloping the man in a blinding light. His screams echoed through the air, but they quickly faded, replaced by silence. When the light faded, the man was gone. Just like that. Amelia stood there, breathless, as the reality of what had just happened settled in. The man was gone. The darkness was gone. And for the first time in a long while, Amelia felt nothing but peace. Amelia stood still, her eyes wide as the last of the darkness around her faded. The silence was deafening, the kind of silence that comes after the storm has passed, leaving nothing but the weight of what just happened. The Vampire King stood beside her, his expression unreadable, but there was a faint glimmer of something in his eyes, something close to approval. He didn't speak right away. They both knew that what had just occurred had changed everything. The man who had haunted her for so long was finally gone, erased from her life like a shadow that could no longer exist in the light. She could feel the emptiness that had filled her for so long start to lift. The pain, the guilt, the fear, they were all fading into the distance, just as the man had. But even in the midst of her relief, Amelia couldn't help but feel a sense of disbelief. Was it truly over? Had she really defeated him, once and for all? She turned slowly toward the Vampire King, her voice barely a whisper. Is it really over? The Vampire King met her gaze, his eyes as piercing as ever. For a moment, there was only silence between them. Then, finally, he spoke. Yes, he said, his voice steady, but there was a depth to it, as though he too was processing what had just happened. It's over. Amelia felt her knees weaken, as if the weight of everything that had happened finally caught up with her. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The Vampire King stepped closer, his presence as steady as ever, like a rock in a storm. You've done what no one else could do, Amelia. You've broken free from your past. Now, it's time to build a future. His words were like a lifeline, pulling her out of the darkness that had held her captive for so long. Amelia looked up at him, her heart still racing. But how? How do I even begin? The Vampire King's gaze softened, and for a fleeting moment, she saw something in his eyes that surprised her, understanding. One step at a time, he said. You don't have to do it all at once. Just start by living. Start by breathing. You've already taken the hardest step. Amelia swallowed hard, trying to keep herself steady. She had spent so long running from her past, hiding from the man who had haunted her life, and now that he was gone, she had no idea what to do next. For the first time in years, she felt like she was standing at the edge of something new, something unknown. The Vampire King continued, his voice calm and steady. You are not alone, Amelia. Not anymore. You have more strength than you realize. She nodded slowly, the weight of his words sinking in. She had always thought she was weak, that she was trapped in a cycle of pain and fear that she could never escape. But now, she knew she had the power to change her own fate. The man who had controlled her life for so long was gone, and in his place was a new future, a future that was hers to create. What do I do now? She asked, her voice full of uncertainty. The Vampire King's lips curled into a slight smile. You live, and you make sure no one ever controls you again. You take back what's yours. Amelia felt the stirrings of hope inside her, a hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. The past was behind her now, and while it would always be a part of her, it didn't have to define her. She could move forward. She could rebuild. Thank you, she said quietly, her voice full of gratitude. The Vampire King nodded, his expression softening ever so slightly. It was you who did this, Amelia. I merely helped you see the truth. You had the strength all along. Amelia nodded, her heart lighter than it had been in years. She was free, not just from the man who had caused her so much pain, but from the fear that had held her hostage for so long. And for the first time in a long while, she felt like she could finally take control of her own destiny. The Vampire King turned to leave, his silhouette vanishing into the distance. Amelia watched him for a moment, the lingering sense of his power still in the air, but for the first time, it didn't feel oppressive. It felt like a distant echo, a reminder that she wasn't alone, even when he was gone. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. The world was hers now. It was time to move forward. With each step she took, the past grew more and more distant. And in its place, a new future was beginning to take shape. A future where she was free, where she could finally breathe without the weight of fear hanging over her head. A future that was hers to build. The Vampire King had shown her the way, but it was Amelia who had done the hard work. And now, the world was wide open to her. As the sun began to set, casting its golden light over the horizon, Amelia took her first true step into her new life. She was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that nothing, no one, could ever control her again. Amelia walked through the quiet streets, the cool evening air brushing against her skin. It was a strange feeling, the sense of freedom she had never fully known until now. She had spent so many years hiding from her past, trying to outrun the shadows that haunted her every step. But today, after everything that had happened, she was beginning to feel something different. Hope. She had faced her fears, stood her ground against the man who had controlled her life, and finally freed herself from the weight of her grief and guilt. For the first time in years, she wasn't looking over her shoulder. She wasn't worried about what the future held. She was walking toward it, step by step, with nothing but the open road ahead of her. The world felt different now. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Amelia couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. The Vampire King had helped her, yes, but it was her own strength, her own determination that had seen her through. She had learned to take control of her life, to stop letting her past define her. But as the days passed, Amelia knew she couldn't forget everything. She had made peace with Nathaniel's passing, but the world of darkness, of vampires, of power, still lingered in the background. She couldn't deny that part of her still felt a connection to that world, even if she didn't fully understand it. She had seen the Vampire King's strength firsthand, and in the quiet moments when she was alone, a part of her wondered what her future would look like now. What was her place in a world she had never fully understood? It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about living. And that was something she had never truly allowed herself to do. A part of her wanted to leave it all behind, to live a simple life, free from the supernatural forces that had shaped her destiny. But deep down, she knew that wasn't possible. The world she had once been forced into was still out there, and she would have to face it again. But now, she was different. She was stronger. She knew she had the power to face whatever came next. As Amelia continued walking, lost in thought, she heard a soft rustle in the shadows ahead. Instinctively, she stopped, her senses alert. The sound was faint, but it was enough to make her pause. She turned toward the alley where the noise had come from, her heart picking up pace. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice steady but laced with the sharp edge of caution. The figure that emerged from the shadows wasn't someone she recognized at first. A man, tall and cloaked in a dark, flowing robe, stepped forward. His face was obscured by the hood, but the power that radiated from him was unmistakable. Amelia's breath caught. Another vampire? Another force from the world she had thought she had escaped? But as the figure stepped into the light, she saw his eyes, familiar, intense, a cold amber glow that sent a shiver down her spine. The man was no stranger. It was him, the Vampire King. Amelia's pulse raced, and her body tensed, instinctively ready for a fight. But the Vampire King held up his hand, a gesture that was both commanding and calming. "Amelia," he said, his voice low and firm. "I did not mean to startle you." She narrowed her eyes, still on guard. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice sharp. The Vampire King stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "I came to make sure you are all right," he said simply. "You may have defeated the man who caused you so much pain, but there is still much that lies ahead. The world you've left behind does not forget so easily." Amelia took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving him. "I'm fine," she said, her voice more certain than she felt. "I'm moving on. I'm done with that world." The Vampire King studied her for a moment, as if measuring her words. "Are you truly ready to leave it behind?" he asked, his voice filled with an intensity that seemed to echo in the quiet street. Amelia paused, her heart heavy with the weight of his question. She had thought she was ready. But now, standing here, facing him, the reality of her situation began to settle in. She wasn't just walking away from the past. She was stepping into a future that was unknown, that was uncertain. But she had to move forward. She had no choice. "I don't know what the future holds," she admitted, her voice softer now. "But I know I'm not running anymore." The Vampire King's eyes softened, and for the first time since they had met, he seemed almost human. "Then you are stronger than most," he said, his tone less cold, more respectful. Amelia didn't know what to say to that. She had spent so long hiding from everything, afraid of what might happen if she stepped out of the shadows. But now, she was ready. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. And no matter what the future held, she was going to face it head on. The Vampire King's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer before he nodded slowly. "You will always have a place in this world," he said, his voice quieter now, almost thoughtful. "But remember, Amelia, the past has a way of resurfacing. And when it does, you must be ready." Amelia nodded, her mind made up. "I will be," she said firmly. "I'm not afraid anymore." With that, the Vampire King turned and began to walk away, disappearing into the shadows as mysteriously as he had appeared. Amelia stood there for a moment, watching him go, the weight of his words lingering in the air. The past may have tried to control her, but it didn't own her anymore. She was free, and now, she was ready to create her own future. Amelia stood alone in the quiet of the night, her mind swirling with the weight of everything she had just encountered. The Vampire King had disappeared into the shadows, leaving her with nothing but his words and the lingering sense of finality in the air. She couldn't shake the feeling that the past, though gone, was still trying to reach out to her. The confrontation, the final battle, those had been physical, but the real fight was internal. She had fought to survive, to escape, but now, she had to fight to live, to find peace in her own heart. She hadn't realized until now just how much the past had shaped her. It had held her captive, kept her from moving forward, always haunted by the fear that one day the darkness would return. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She wasn't the woman who ran from everything that terrified her. Amelia was ready to face the world with a new resolve, to build the life she had always wanted, the life she had always deserved. The streets around her were quiet, the only sound her footsteps echoing as she walked through the city. The cool air brushed against her skin, the breeze almost like a reminder that things were changing. She was changing. For the first time in so long, she felt light, free. She didn't have to carry the weight of her past with her anymore. But even with this newfound freedom, something nagged at the back of her mind. The Vampire King's words echoed in her ears. The past has a way of resurfacing. What did that mean for her future? The question lingered, but she couldn't dwell on it. She couldn't allow herself to be consumed by fear again. She had already made it through the worst. No, now it was time for something new. She wasn't sure where she was headed, but she knew she wasn't walking into the unknown with empty hands. She had herself now. She was in control. As she walked, her thoughts drifted back to the Vampire King. His role in her life had been unexpected, even terrifying at times. But he had been right. He had helped her see her own strength. He had helped her face the worst of what she had been running from. And now, she was standing here, her future in her own hands. She smiled to herself, realizing how far she had come. It wasn't just about escaping her past anymore. It was about stepping into her future that didn't need to be defined by fear or regret. It was hers to shape, and she was determined to make something of it. As the city lights flickered in the distance, Amelia felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for the life she had been given, but for the second chance she had earned. She wasn't just alive anymore. She was living. Amelia had spent years thinking she would never escape the shadow of the past. She had spent so long hiding from it, running from it. But now she understood. It wasn't about running. It was about facing it head-on. The past would always be a part of her, but it no longer had to control her. She had a choice, and she had chosen freedom. She continued down the street, the weight of her past lifting with every step she took. For the first time, she felt truly free. She had no idea where life would take her from here, but she was ready for it, ready to face whatever came next. It was as though a new world had opened up to her. She had always felt like an outsider, like she didn't quite fit. But now, she felt like she belonged. In this moment, in this life she had reclaimed, Amelia felt more herself than she ever had before. She was no longer a victim of her past. She was a survivor, and she was ready to live her life on her own terms. The moon rose higher in the sky, its pale light casting long shadows on the ground as Amelia made her way home. It was a peaceful night, the kind of night that promised hope, the kind of night that whispered of new beginnings. She didn't look back. There was no need to. Her past was behind her, and her future was waiting, a future that was hers to create. And for the first time in her life, Amelia was truly ready to step into it. Amelia woke up the next morning with a sense of calm that had eluded her for years. The soft light filtered through the curtains of her modest apartment, casting a warm glow over the simple, yet comforting space she had built for herself. She had learned to live here, to find peace in the quiet moments, away from the chaos of her past. She didn't need anything grand to feel whole. As she sat up on the edge of the bed, the events of the last few days seemed like a distant dream, as though everything had happened in another life. The confrontation with the man who had haunted her, the unexpected alliance with the Vampire King, it all felt like it belonged to someone else. But as she stood up and moved toward the small kitchen, the sense of freedom she had gained remained. She had made it. She had survived the worst and come out stronger on the other side. Amelia knew that the world hadn't magically changed, that there would still be challenges ahead. But today, for the first time, she felt ready to face them. The quiet morning was interrupted by the sound of her phone vibrating on the counter. She glanced at it, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the unknown number flashing on the screen. She had grown used to the silence, to the absence of calls, but now, she couldn't help but feel a knot form in her stomach. It wasn't the first time the past had tried to reach out to her, but this time, there was something different. With a deep breath, she picked up the phone and answered. "Hello," she said cautiously, unsure of what to expect. The voice on the other end was calm, steady. "Amelia," the voice said, a deep, familiar tone that sent a shiver down her spine. "It's been a long time." Amelia's blood ran cold. She knew that voice. It was him, the man from her past. The one she had thought was gone for good. The one she had finally freed herself from. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with the fear she hadn't quite been able to shake off. The man chuckled darkly. "Oh, Amelia, you think you can escape me that easily?" His voice dripped with malice. "I've been watching, waiting. You think you can walk away from what you did? From everything we were? You belong to me." Amelia felt her grip on the phone tighten, but she didn't back down. "I don't belong to anyone. Least of all you," she replied, her voice firmer now, the old fear replaced with a quiet strength she hadn't known she had. The man's laugh sent chills down her spine. We'll see about that. You can run, Amelia, but you can never outrun what you've done. The line went dead. Amelia stood frozen for a moment, the phone still pressed to her ear. Her heart pounded in her chest. The darkness had returned, creeping back into her life like an old, unwelcome visitor. But this time, she was ready. She had faced her past before, and she would do it again. She wasn't the same woman who had once been afraid of every shadow, every noise. She had learned to fight. She had learned that she could not run from her fears, but face them head on. And she would not let him control her anymore. She set the phone down and walked to the window, staring out at the city below. The streets were busy, full of life, full of possibilities. For the first time, the world seemed open to her. But she knew that peace was fleeting. The man was out there, waiting. The darkness was never truly gone. But she wouldn't let it take hold of her again. She would confront it, just as she had confronted every other fear in her life. She was no longer a prisoner to the past. She was free. And with that thought, a sense of resolve washed over her. She wasn't running from this anymore. She was facing it. Amelia turned away from the window and walked toward the door. There was no time to waste. She wasn't going to wait for him to come to her. She was going to find him. The battle wasn't over yet, but she was ready for it. The man who thought he still controlled her would learn just how wrong he was. She was stronger than he realized. And this time, she would be the one who won. Amelia didn't waste a moment after the call ended. The words of the man who had once controlled her life were still ringing in her ears, but she refused to let them weaken her resolve. She had spent years living in fear, letting the darkness of her past haunt every step she took. No more. She wouldn't let him have that power over her again. She had learned to fight, to survive. And now, she would learn to conquer. The first thing she did was grab her coat and head out the door, her steps firm and purposeful. She didn't know where he was, but she knew that she couldn't let him continue to manipulate her life from the shadows. He had to be stopped. Her mind raced as she walked through the city streets, her eyes scanning the crowds, looking for any sign of him. She knew she couldn't do this alone, not this time. She needed to find allies, people who understood the world she had been thrust into, the supernatural world that had been a part of her life, whether she wanted it or not. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through her contacts, her finger hovering over the name she hadn't called in weeks. The Vampire King. She hesitated for a moment before dialing his number. The phone rang only once before he picked up, his voice calm and unhurried as always. "Amelia," he said, as if he had been expecting her call. "I take it you've heard from him." "Yes," she replied, her voice steady but filled with the weight of everything that had transpired. "He's back, and I need your help." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then the Vampire King's voice came again, low and filled with an unshakable certainty. "You know what needs to be done, but I'll be with you, Amelia. I won't let him take control of you again." A sense of relief washed over her at his words. She wasn't alone. The Vampire King had been a force of power in her life, but now, he was more than just a shadow of the past. He was an ally, and that made all the difference. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I won't let him win. Not again." They agreed to meet later that evening at a quiet, secluded spot on the outskirts of the city, a place where they could plan without the risk of being seen or overheard. Amelia felt a sense of urgency pulse through her. She was done hiding, done running from what was inevitable. She had to face him, and she was ready. She arrived at the location just as the sun dipped below the horizon, the darkness of night slowly swallowing the last remnants of daylight. The Vampire King was already there, standing in the shadows, his posture tall and commanding. As she approached, he turned to face her, his amber eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "You're here," he said, his voice as steady as ever. "We'll end this tonight." Amelia nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. The time for hesitation had passed. The world had already changed, and she had to be the one to shape the future. The Vampire King led her to a hidden alleyway, far away from the watchful eyes of the city. As they stood in the quiet, distant from the hustle and bustle of the world, Amelia took a deep breath. "I know what I have to do," she said, "but I'm not sure I'm ready for what comes next." The Vampire King stepped closer, his eyes softening ever so slightly. "You are ready," he said firmly. "You've already proven your strength. Now, you just need to trust yourself." Amelia looked at him, her eyes filled with both determination and doubt. "What if I fail?" she asked quietly. The Vampire King's expression softened even more. "You won't. Not because of what you lack, but because of who you are. You've already overcome the greatest fear of all, being trapped by your own past. Now you will step into your future." His words settled into her like a balm, soothing the anxiety that had been eating at her since she'd learned the man she had feared was back. She had to confront him. She had to stop him before he could hurt anyone else. The sound of footsteps echoed through the alleyway, bringing Amelia's attention back to the task at hand. She turned to see the figure emerging from the darkness. His eyes gleamed with malice, his posture twisted in that same arrogance she remembered from before. He had come to finish what he started. The man she had once feared, the one who had threatened her very soul, was here. But this time, Amelia wasn't afraid. She stepped forward, meeting his gaze with unwavering strength. "It ends now," she said, her voice strong and clear. The man's eyes narrowed as a cruel smile spread across his face. "You think you can stop me, Amelia?" he sneered. "You think you have the power to defeat me?" Amelia stood tall, feeling the weight of everything she had overcome within her. She didn't need to prove anything to him. She knew what she was capable of. "I don't need to defeat you," she said firmly. "I just need to make sure you never hurt anyone again." The man lunged forward, but before he could reach her, the Vampire King stepped between them, his eyes blazing with an ancient, untouchable fury. "You've lost," the Vampire King said, his voice cold and powerful. "It's over." The man hesitated for just a moment, fear flickering in his eyes for the first time. But it was too late. Amelia was done running. She was done being afraid. And this time, she was going to win. The man, once so sure of himself, faltered as the Vampire King stood resolutely between him and Amelia. His eyes, usually filled with arrogance and malice, now flickered with doubt. For the first time, he seemed to realize that the power he once wielded over her was slipping away. The weight of his past actions, the pain he had caused, had finally caught up with him. Amelia, standing beside the Vampire King, felt a surge of strength course through her. This wasn't just about stopping him. This was about reclaiming her life. The man took a step back, his eyes narrowing. "You think you've won?" he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "You think you can just walk away from all of this, free from me? You can't. You belong to me, Amelia. You always will." But Amelia didn't flinch. She had heard those words too many times before. The chains he had tried to place on her no longer had any hold. She met his gaze with unwavering confidence. "No," she said, her voice steady. "I don't belong to you. I never did. And now I'm free." The Vampire King stepped forward, his presence a calm, yet undeniable force. His amber eyes glowed with an ancient power, and the air around him seemed to crackle with energy. "You've caused enough pain," he said to the man, his voice filled with finality. "You've manipulated, controlled, and hurt people for far too long. It ends now." The man's expression shifted from anger to fear as he realized the truth in the Vampire King's words. He opened his mouth, perhaps to protest, perhaps to threaten, but nothing came out. The Vampire King's power was absolute, and the man knew he had no chance against it. Amelia stood silently, watching the scene unfold. She had once been afraid of this moment, unsure of whether she could confront her past and the man who had taken so much from her. But now, she felt nothing but peace. The man, the source of all her fear, was powerless before her. The Vampire King turned to her, his gaze softening. "It's over," he said simply. Amelia nodded, her heart light as she realized just how true those words were. The man who had haunted her for so long was no longer a threat. He was nothing more than a shadow, vanishing into the distance. She could finally breathe again. The Vampire King stepped back, his posture relaxing. "You've done well, Amelia," he said, his voice quieter now, almost as if acknowledging her growth. "You've freed yourself from the chains he placed on you. You've taken control of your destiny." Amelia took a deep breath, the weight of the past lifting with every exhale. She had spent so long running from her fears, hiding from the darkness. But now, she had learned to face it. And in doing so, she had conquered it. "Thank you," she said, her voice sincere, filled with gratitude for the Vampire King's help. "I couldn't have done it without you." The Vampire King nodded. "It was your strength that brought you here, Amelia. I only helped you see it." They stood in silence for a moment, the quiet of the night settling around them. Amelia felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The battle had been long and hard, but she had won. And with the past finally put to rest, she could finally move forward. The Vampire King turned to leave, but Amelia stopped him with a single word. "Where will you go?" she asked, a touch of curiosity in her voice. He paused, his gaze meeting hers. "I have my own path to follow," he said, his tone cryptic yet understanding. "But you, Amelia, you have your own life to live now. That's what matters." She nodded, understanding what he meant. He had played his part in her story, but now, her story was hers alone to write. The Vampire King took one last look at her, his amber eyes glowing with something like approval. "Remember, Amelia," he said, his voice low and serious. "No matter what happens, you are stronger than you realize. Never forget that." With that, he disappeared into the shadows, leaving her standing in the quiet street, the weight of the moment settling in. Amelia stood there for a while, watching the empty space where he had been, then slowly turned to face her future. The past was behind her, and the future was wide open. There was no more fear, no more chains. She was free. She smiled to herself, a quiet but confident smile, as she walked into the night, her steps light and full of purpose. The journey had been long, but now, she was ready for whatever came next. She was finally living her own life, on her own terms. And for the first time, she felt truly at peace. This gripping tale of transformation and empowerment takes you deep into the world of vampire stories, where darkness and light collide. Follow the journey of Amelia, a woman who has been haunted by her past, but is finally ready to face the shadows that once controlled her. As she confronts a powerful figure from her past, she discovers strength within herself that she never knew existed. The chilling moments and intense confrontations build up as Amelia steps into her future, leaving behind the fear that once held her captive. This story weaves together themes of overcoming personal demons, confronting supernatural forces, and finding peace after years of struggle. If you are a fan of vampire stories, this is a must-listen journey that blends suspense with an emotional battle for freedom. The world of vampire stories often explores the tension between light and darkness, and in this narrative, Amelia's courage shines through as she battles not only an external foe, but also the fears that have shaped her existence. With the Vampire King's guidance, Amelia learns to reclaim her life, but the man from her past is never far behind. The chilling connection between them reveals the deeper lore of the vampire world, making it clear that vampire stories are not just about bloodlust, but about control, power, and redemption. This particular vampire story stands apart as Amelia proves that no matter how dark the past, the strength to overcome it comes from within. The story continues to unfold as she seeks to break free from the chains of her past, reminding listeners that even in the darkest vampire stories, there is always hope for redemption.